Jim, you've said that in the 2012 election, we saw the more political Obama, in a way a more old-fashioned partisan Obama. But did we also see a more demagogic one? I mean, the emphasis on the raising taxes on the 2%, or even in some cases the 1%, seems to open the doors to a kind of class politics that's not unknown in American history, but certainly it would have troubled, it seems to me, Madison or Jefferson, much less Hamilton or Adams or George Washington. What do you make of the class war features of this past campaign?
Well, this was very prominent. It went back to early last year when Obama returned to Osawatomie and gave his version of
Kansas,
TR's speech.
Right.
Yes, and it was based on that idea of the wealthy and the division between the others and the wealthy, and a pitting of one against another, which is a characteristic feature of one form of Athenian politics, rich against poor, and boosting yourself by attacking another. You always want to boost yourself by attacking another when the other is smaller and the part you're standing for is larger. So this is classic politics. In addition, what afforded Obama the opportunity to carry this forward is that the Republicans nominated a candidate who himself was wealthy and who made his money in finance. So he presented a real target for this. It's a very difficult thing. I think the greatest disadvantage of Mitt Romney in the campaign was to have been a wealthy person defending capitalism. We've had a lot of wealthy people who have attacked capitalism, but a person defending capitalism presents a target. And we already saw this because Mitt Romney was a target of the other Republican candidates during the primaries for the same reason.
Yes, Newt Gingrich first raised this charge.
So there you have it. I think it has a somewhat a dangerous aspect going forward of class politics, but I think we'll soon learn that however much money that you are able to get from the top 1 or 2%, that it will not go very far towards solving the deficit problem. So that truth will come home rather soon, and after people are satisfied that the tax rates have been raised and that the rich are paying more, we'll be back to the same problem. How can you pay for the government that you want?
And Obamacare is a spectacular instance of a program proposed because the two other main medical care programs of the federal government, Medicare, Medicaid, were going broke. And so the solution is a third program, which is supposed to save money, but I think most realistic observers think is going to cost a lot of money anyway. So there wasn't much discussion of Obamacare in this past campaign, even by the Republicans, who had it in their sights for a whole, for 2 years basically since the legislation passed. Did that surprise you?
Well, one of the difficulties in bringing this up is that the real costs of this are going to come in the future, and we didn't see the real costs before. So you would be pointing to something that would take place that people were not yet feeling. I think voters, like most people, they're based on their experience, and until the shoe falls, right. It's an abstraction. There are other reasons as well why it wasn't brought up because...
Well, you had a court opinion as well.
Right.
You had a big case. John Roberts delivered a 5-4 endorsement of the constitutionality of Obamacare on a rather eccentric theory. Now, I wanted to talk about the question of constitutionality in our politics. You have, in the spring 2012 issue of the Claremont Review, written an important article which makes a distinction between what you call political constitutionalism and legal constitutionalism. And if I may just quote a sentence or so from you, you say that political constitutionalism, quote, understands the Constitution as a document that fixes certain ends of government activity, whereas the legal or legalistic approach to the Constitution, quote, understands it as a set of rules that can decide policies or cases with definitive answers that could be employed by courts. the effect of the court's ruling was in a way to cabin political constitutionalism, because now Obamacare has the blessing of legalistic constitutionalism. Would you agree with that?
Exactly, and this is the problem is that people equate constitutionalism more and more with legal constitutionalism. So the court, I don't want to debate the legalities. The court found that in its view that the Obamacare did not violate the legal elements of the Constitution. And many people said, okay, the constitutional issue is settled,
right,
let's move on. I think the proper response would have been, well, that's a legal decision, but it really doesn't answer whether Obamacare is constitutional. And to have continued the constitutional argument about why this law violates the purposes and ends of the Constitution and even the letter of the law, to have made that an issue, it's more and more difficult to do so. I speak to
but isn't it unconstitutional to say that the court doesn't have the last word on what's constitutional?
Not at all. The only point where it would cause a real problem is if the court were demanding that something be done. Mm-hmm. And in this case, it wasn't demanding that something to be done. Look, there's so many things that have been considered. I'm going to take a sip. So many things that have been considered in recent times to be constitutional that a political party could coherently argue are unconstitutional. Mm-hmm. Let's take the federal intervention into education. Maybe each law taken on its own does not violate a legal element of the Constitution, but look, we've reached a point now where the federal government or the national government will be setting curricular standards not just in reading and math, but in the social sciences as well. Is it in the spirit of the Constitution that our school children will have a national curriculum determined by some national decision? Or is this in a way a violation of the very core of the Constitution? This will never be settled, I don't think, in courts. Or if it is, it'll be a small issue. It will take a political party to argue what the purposes and ends of the Constitution are, what the division of power between the states and the national government should be, and ensconce that in a program of politics. And this is what is lacking, the view that a program of a political party can't be something constitutional and is only political. In fact, a political party ought to be inspired in many of its aims by what the Constitution asks of it.
So from your point of view, then, it's not just the court who has a word, who has the final word, if anyone has the final word, but every department of the government and citizens at large have a right to think about what's constitutional and unconstitutional and to judge legislation in the light of those standards. That's the political aspect of it.
Right, and not only pieces of legislation, but a direction in which we're going. The constitutional question today might not be something that's settled in a court decision about the boundary between the federal government and the states, but whether over time we're going to move more power generally and more say to the states rather than the federal government. That could be administrative procedures, it could be laws, it's a whole direction in which you're leading.
It's perfectly fine, you think, to make the argument that Obamacare remains unconstitutional, maybe on grounds other than the mandate or other than the taxing power, but politically it can still be attacked legitimately as something unconstitutional, as a direction of policy that takes us away from both the legal and the political meaning of the Constitution.
Definitely, and when you look at the founding, I think it's a mistake to think that the courts were ever to be the institution to decide all constitutional questions. They decide some of them. I think this position I'm taking is not an attack on judicial review. It's an attack on what the scope of judicial review actually means. It's at best going to serve only part of the constitutional issues. Look, when you look at the way the institutions were supposed to maintain their power in the constitutional scheme, the founders don't mention the courts, they mention ambition checking ambition. I think they thought the states would have a way of checking the federal government. There are mechanisms in the Constitution for resolving constitutional disputes that have nothing to do with courts. And here we are, over 2 centuries later, arrived at a situation where we think the only place a constitutional issue will be resolved is in the courts. This is a massive legalization of our political culture. Far more dangerous, I would say, then some people say where judicial review goes too far. That's not the issue. It's the thought that all constitutional issues are decided by courts. That's the dilemma.
But at the same time, you make the point in this article in the CRB that there's no specific foreign policy or economic policy called for by political constitutionalism. You say, quote, political constitutionalism is not laissez-faire, Hayekian, liberal, or conservative, unquote. But then presumably there are some boundaries, you know, pure communism, communist economics would be outside somehow the purview of the Constitution. But how can you condemn Obamacare, having said at the same time that there's no economic arrangements that are dictated by the Constitution?
What I meant by that is that the Constitution was not meant to settle every issue, the sort of foreign. It was meant to set up a structure of government, and if there are economic implications, you have to find them in the Constitution. You can't find them by looking at Milton Friedman or Hayek.
I see.
So there are parts of the Constitution which impinge on economic theory. But there are parts of conservatism, liberalism, Hayekianism, which come from outside the Constitution. Those parts can be enacted according to partisan to the extent to which they're constitutional. The Constitution does impose some limits, obviously, on the economy, I think important ones. It does impose certainly limits on power and planning and the role of the federal government. So what I wanted to suggest in that is that the Constitution should be looked at beginning from the Constitution. And while we have other elements of politics that flow outside and are brought in from other sources, the Constitution is the source for constitutionalism, if that's not a kind of repetitive slogan.
Brilliant.